Hello and welcome to ReadySetCyber. It's an ongoing discussion around the issues and solutions in cybersecurity today. Thanks for joining us, everyone. I'm Amy Babinchak. I'm a technical person. I'm an awarded MVP with Microsoft for 18 years running so far. I'm the former owner of an MSP for 23 years and the current owner of Third Tier, where we provide technical training of our own design, mastermind groups for MSP owners, and weekly Microsoft 365 admin newsletter. And I am your host for today. So our topic today is the ever-evolving and increasing heated cybersecurity landscape. Cyber insurance is more and more in demand, or is it? Firms that are buying cyber insurance are turning to their MSPs to help them navigate the complexities of insurance, but the situation is not without question marks. There are a lot of insurance changes out there that really challenges an MSP's natural instinct and introduces a partner that they did not want in their services mix. So is cyber insurance or the MSP, are we at odds, or can we just learn to get along? In this edition of Ready, Set, Cyber, we're going to talk with the experts about cyber security strategy, risk management, cyber insurance, MSPs, and how businesses can make informed decisions. So if you're joining us live and have questions or comments during the show, we encourage you to speak up, put a thing into our chat, and we'll do our best to get you in on the conversation. If you're watching the recording, leave any comments and we'll get back to you afterwards. So now let's meet our panelists. Andy Runyon, wave. Hi, Andy, is a
Howdy.
risk partner with Fifth Wall Solutions. Fifth Wall is the largest and oldest cyber-specific insurance brokerage in the U.S. They work with retail agencies and MSPs across the country to help their clients get the most comprehensive coverage at the best price. Chris Francis, hey Chris,
Hey everyone.
is with 360 Advanced, is a cybersecurity and compliance firm that specializes in tailored security support and compliance programs. Dan DeFrey, hey Dan,
Hey,
is with North Star Technology Group. He's a cybersecurity expert and chief security officer of one of the fastest growing nationwide MSPs. And Heath Spencer, CEO of Traitware, expert in phishing-resistant, passwordless multi-factor authentication for the enterprise. Morning, Keith, or Heath. Sorry,
good morning.
mispronounced your name. Jeez.
Sorry.
So as a former MSP myself, I feel like I can speak for many when I say that gaining a partner in IT services makes us bristle a little bit. Co-managed isn't really something that all MSPs embrace, and I personally think that the MSP doesn't actually have a choice, but to get with the program here and to learn how to get along, but not all of them will, of course. Does this mean that business owners might have to look at changing their MSP for another one? So, Andy, what's the key questions that companies should be asking before engaging an MSP around cyber insurance?
The biggest question for us is there a relationship between the MSP and the cyber insurance, not necessarily carrier, but the agent, right? Whoever the relationship is. I find that more often than not, there's a disconnect there. Whoever the local agent is that carries the cyber insurance, they don't have a relationship with the MSP, and the MSP doesn't have an open line of communication with the insurance carrier. And at the end of the day, it's our opinion, at least, that the client is the one that ends up suffering.
Yeah, I find that sometimes as an MSP, business owners put up a wall between us and cyber insurance too. So that can happen. Hey, Dan, what are the responsibilities of the MSP regarding cybersecurity and insurance?
Yeah, so one of the things that I like to look at is whenever we're dealing with protecting a company, I like to just look at everything as where is boom and where do we sit in terms of boom. And when I say boom, I mean a major cyber event like a breach. And MSPs, we are naturally going to be on the left side of boom. We're going to be trying to minimize everything we can to make sure boom doesn't happen. And then we're also now, since we were starting to establish relationships with insurance companies, we're going to make sure that that insurance form checklist is being met so that if boom does happen, now the cyber insurance is actually going to pay out the claim and, do what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, I know in my MSP, we had clients who were filling that form out on their own and not even informing us that it was there.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Very regularly.
We never knew if they even had insurance. It was never really part of the conversation. And so the
Yeah.
thing that's nice now is that, companies like Fifth Wall and carriers like Coalition, they have programs and we've partnered with them. And now that conversation is happening, on both sides, which is great.
Yeah, that's part of the education process, isn't it, Andy? Like business owners need to know that they have to engage their MSP too.
Correct. And I mean, I really don't like laying this at the feet of the business owners because this has been a very fast evolving thing. If you go back to 2019, to get cyber insurance, you could answer a handful of questions that had nothing to do with your controls, right? Name, address, revenue, employees, and are you in the marijuana adult film casino industry? Like that was underwriting in 2019, right? So if I'm a business owner and I've been running my successful business for 20, 30 years, now all of a sudden in the last 3 years, if I want cyber insurance, I'm getting asked about MFA, right? I'm getting asked about EDR. I'm getting asked about security awareness training, very, very technical questions. So just having insurance period is a new thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But having these technical questions and having to get the input of my MSP is
That's a whole new thing for both sides, and I got to call Andy out a little bit because the reason we're getting those is because initially the cyber insurance companies they didn't really understand the market very well, and they kind of lost their shirt. And so now they're much more risk adverse, and I think they're doing it in a smarter way. And we can be an ally here, but we still got a ways to go. Heath, I remember when I first introduced MFA to my MSP clients some years back, and they hated it, but I got them all on board anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a lot of them still do.
I know, but I think we can draw a lot of lessons from that and maybe extend those lessons into the whole adoption of cybersecurity and compliance. What's your take on that resistance to MFA and how can we address it?
Well, my take on the resistance to MFA is that 99% of the MFA that's out there in the world today introduced extra friction through added layers of security to the users. Rather than reducing friction for the user, it just added more frustration, extra steps. Every system out there put the onus or the responsibility on the individual to take these extra steps, and they just wanted to be able to do their job. It was kind of sad that almost in every other industry, modern technology had allowed innovation to move faster, more efficiently, all of those things, reducing friction for a user. This also created extra exposure, right? The faster we moved, the more exposure there was. So then we had to figure out how to add security after the fact. And most platforms that are out there have had that friction problem. It's part of why it's a major reason where our company was born from, right? Those personal frustrations around password management, then layering on extra added friction of security to that, and how do we evaluate modern solutions to that problem to reduce friction for the user while increasing security in moving people to a point where they can use MFA without even knowing they're using it is the best way I can say we can get them to use it without them knowing it. And if they're not knowing that they're using it, they won't complain about it.
No, that'd be ideal, wouldn't it? We always have a problem between usability and security historically.
Yeah.
And, tell my clients, they would ask if they're, is everything good? Are we completely secure? I'm like, well, you're not completely secure. In order to be completely secure, I'd have to have you not do any work at all, right? And we got to draw a line someplace between usability and security. I got another question for you, Heath.
Yep.
MSPs, we care about security. Insurance guys like Andy, welcome back, Andy. They care about risk.
Right. Yeah.
And they tend to leverage regulatory compliance to address that risk. but I'm not really confident that MSPs and business leaders actually understand the difference between risk and security. So what's the difference between compliance risk and security?
So I think that the difference between, I think there's overlap, right? And I think that it's improving. And I think if Andy mentioned this earlier, 6 years ago, a cyber insurance application was 8 questions. Now it might be 8 pages. And they are trying to figure out what are the critical controls. And I think ways for people to understand this is to look at things that have been around for much longer than cyber insurance, right? So if you look at property and casualty, and whether you look at your automotive policy or the fire insurance on your home, and if you look at risk, right? So let's take, I live and others live in an area where there is lots of wildland fire, right? Which is huge risk, and a lot of insurance companies have tried to pull out of those areas. And evaluating, being compliant to get the cyber insurance with, defensible space, right? So I got to limb up my trees and I got to clear the brush and all these things this far away from my house or any other structures, reduces my risk while being compliant to obtain the insurance policy. I do believe there's overlap. What I think, or where people run into problems, and this was mentioned earlier, is if they just check the box on a form that says, yeah, we're doing these things, without actually confirming that they're doing it, or
and that's where the MSP is starting to step up and really partner with the insurance carrier.
Yeah, correct. And so there's something to say. People, I think, assume, well, I've got MFA because I use it for this one application, right? Or I've done these things, so I can check the box that I'm compliant. Well, that didn't actually, address the real risks. And Amy, as you said, we all carry some measure of risk. In fact, cyber insurance is just a measure of transferring that risk out of your line of business, right? And so that's, that there's exposure, but how do we reduce the risk as much as possible while being compliant with whether it's the need to actually have an insurance policy pay when something happens, right? Or it's federal regulation, et cetera, those things. So, going back to a real world example, let's say you have a teenage driver in your house and you say, I'm going to put this tracker in my OBD port of my car to show how my teenager's driving, right? And then the insurance is going to be less money this month. But then you decide that there's no way my teenager is actually going to drive to adhere to the requirements that tracker would want to see. So I'm going to say my teenager's driving this car, and we're going to let mom drive that car, and we're going to put the teenager in the other car, right? That would be a real world example of like checking compliance and transferring risk where you didn't actually address the problem, right? And so having raised 3 children that are now young adults and paying their own insurance, that I understand that pain point, but you had to, what was your tolerance for addressing that risk exposure?
Those are some really great examples, because as a person who lives in Michigan without really any weather event risks or extremely low, and not having any children, to me, when I buy insurance, it's just sort of like set it, forget it. There's no requirements, it's just like you buy it, it's done. But cyber insurance isn't like that at all. So Andy, what are the most common misconceptions about cyber insurance? I mean, can you bust a myth or two for us?
Yeah, I think probably the most common misconception about cyber insurance is that really 2 in 1 is that it's super expensive and it doesn't pay. Our average policy at Fifth Wall for a small business, less than 10 million in revenues, running right now about $400 a month, somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000 in annual premium, and that's for comprehensive coverage. And then the other thing, just the idea that cyber insurance doesn't
I think Andy froze again for some
Yeah, we
reason.
froze up Andy again.
Yeah, no,
All right.
I think I'm back. Yeah, do
You're
you
back.
have me? Yep.
Yep, we do. Go ahead.
The general idea that cyber insurance doesn't pay internally at Fifth Wall, knock on wood, we haven't had a denied claim in 2 years. But really, where I think that perception comes from is really two things. Number one, I think that when folks, Heath mentioned the application, right? A lot of historic applications will say, do you have MFA? Yes or no, right? Well, number one, that's a poor question, right? We'll admit that's not a great. I think that I keep freezing. Are you guys able to hear me?
Yeah.
Anyway, the old binary question of do you have MFA? Yes or no? It's a poor question, but a lot of folks will miss a test of that. They'll say that they do when they don't, right? That can trigger a denied claim. And then the other thing is just not not understanding what products you've bought, particularly around cybercrime. Cybercrime is on the rise. There are a lot more phishing attempts now. AI is making it easier and easier to generate a good-looking phishing email, and as those claims go up, people really need to look at their crime policy or crime portion of their policy to make sure that it does cover what their exposure is. If you're regularly wiring 50, 60, 70K, but your policy only says that you have $5,000 of crime coverage, that's an issue, right? So we see, these narratives where folks will be doing their normal business and they'll wire 65,000. It'll get intercepted. They'll go claim their policy, which from inception only had $5,000 of coverage on it. And they go, oh, well, there you go. Cyber insurance is a scam. It doesn't pay out. You didn't understand the policy that you bought from the jump. So I would say probably the idea that it's overpriced and it doesn't pay out are the two biggest myths we deal with.
Yeah, I think it's really important that they deal with someone who's an expert in cyber insurance too, because not all insurance agents are. Their business insurance that they're buying from today, that may not be the best place to go for it. Dan, I see you nodding on that. What's the biggest challenges we have as MSPs in this cybersecurity landscape today?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them, right? But
yeah, just pick one for me. I know you and I could talk about that all day.
Let's start with, I think for an MSP, if you're not already security focused, you need to either close shop or get security focused. Like I don't see how an MSP that doesn't focus on security is going to make it now.
100%. I tell you, I wrote a blog post, it'd be 4 or 5 years ago now, and I said, we all have to become cybersecurity generalists now.
Yep, absolutely. And whenever we engage a customer, we always start with a risk assessment. I have to know what kind of risk I'm getting involved in. So that's our very first engagement. We do a risk assessment and we don't move forward unless that pans out and we verify there's no indicators of compromise or anything like that, because it's too expensive for us to take on a customer who's not taking it seriously.
That's a very good point. Hey, Chris, what are some of the mistakes that businesses make when they're approaching an MSP about cybersecurity?
Great question. And I think this comes down to right sizing the MSP to your business risk profile. And what that means is if you approach them and for instance, they don't have a certain service that you need to accommodate your risk program or your compliance program, that's a gap. If they don't have certain compliance standards in place that are requirements that you have to have on behalf of your clients, that's a risk, right? And I could get deeper into that statement if we need to. But ultimately, I think vendor due diligence is the answer here. And just like Dan was saying, is he's doing that to his clients, they should be doing it to their MSPs as well to ensure that the risk profile that you have matches that of your MSP and that they can support your compliance program, your services. Like Dan said, a risk assessment is a great example of MSPs help their clients do that all the time. And also, a risk assessment is a requirement of almost every compliance standard in the market. So that is like the baseline of getting a program stood up and or maintaining it. So we want to make sure that, I think my original statement is right sizing the MSP you select to your risk profile is the answer. I don't see a lot of organizations going down that path. Generally, and I hate to say this, sometimes it's a fee decision, or the business has grown beyond the MSP they've had in place, and they just continue to work with who they had as an SMB, and now they're mid-market. Now that creates a gap in security and compliance right there, not because the MSP did anything wrong, but because the business has outgrown the capabilities of said MSP.
Yeah, I think there's a real problem that we have in our industry. I don't know if you guys know, I just finished up a 3-year presidency with the National Society of IT Service Providers that I helped found. One of my missions over there is to try to professionalize this industry so that the consumer of our services has some way to understand the differences between MSPs, because I know there's a lot of difference between Dan and the guy down the street, but the consumer doesn't know it. So when they're making those decisions, and with this level of security complexity that we have out there and compliance and regulations, it's complicated, and they don't even know how to start that conversation with their MSP.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, and that's for us. The way we show our value is through that risk assessment, because typically, most our MSPs that aren't focused on security are just gonna say, "Yeah, we'll take care of you." When we do the risk assessment, we show them the results. We find out they don't have cyber insurance. There's some gaps that have to be filled, and they're more willing to open up their wallet.
Right. So at the top of this conversation, I mentioned that MSPs naturally bristle at having to adopt a partner that they didn't choose. We like our independence. Most MSPs are small, and so that entrepreneurial spirit really runs strong in them. And so I'd like to hear from any of you what you think the key aspects are of good partnerships between cyber insurers and service providers. Do you have any specific examples or cases of one that was particularly good, or even something that was bad? Because we learn a lot from failed relationships too. So Chris, let's start with you. As a compliance firm, I assume your company finds itself mostly in managed scenario or co-managed scenarios. What makes a great partnership with an MSP or the cyber insurance firm?
So great question. From our perspective, you're right. A lot of our clients are co-hosted or have their IT infrastructure managed by an MSP. I think and this will kind of account for really any partnership that exists in the cybersecurity space. The MSP and the cyber insurer make money different ways, right? The cyber insurance is focused on that. MSP is focused on keeping their clients' infrastructure up and running. So from a partnership standpoint, I don't think there's any stepping on toes there. I do agree with your statement that MSPs do like to remain independent. I understand, but what really creates that great partnership is the separation of duties and what each person or entity brings to the relationship.
Yep.
In Andy's circumstance, he's excellent at guiding clients through their cyber insurance options, and I'm certain that he partners with lots of MSPs just like yourselves that are excellent at servicing their clients and keeping their IT infrastructure up and running. So I would suggest stay in your lane, understand what the other needs to be successful, help support them anywhere you can, and continue to grow the business with the client. So I think it's a complementary relationship more so than a butt heads relationship. However, what can play a role in that? Egos and money, and MSP wants to mark up cyber insurance services. I don't know. However, if we're all staying in our lanes, understand what value we bring to the relationship, I believe that a good MSP will have an Andy Runyon in their back pocket and be able to provide those options to their client upon needing it.
Yeah, and if I can add a point to that, Chris, I mean, one of the best relationships we have are where the owner of the business brings us and their insurance agent together. Like when we have that relationship, everything goes much more smoothly. And we have much more confidence that everything's going to be handled. And heaven forbid, a breach happens, we've made sure everything's being done for that checklist, and the assurance is just going to do what it does.
Hey, Dan, Chris mentioned staying in your lane. Do you guys have a lane? Where do you draw that line?
Yeah, I still like to look at it like boom is the line, right? We're trying to prevent boom, and right of boom is where the insurance comes in. And I always like to, a lot of times, and you probably experienced this, Amy, people don't understand that once a breach occurs, that's an IT problem that can't be fixed. That's now going to be a legal problem, or it's going to be, some other kind of huge problem that your IT guy or whoever is helping you is not going to be equipped to handle. So that is where incident response, insurance, all of that comes into play, and you've got to have a good team there ready to go.
An effective incident response or DR plan goes a long ways in separating those lanes. I'll add to that.
Good point, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to that a little bit, and a couple things on the good partnerships too, right? And unfortunately, we lost Andy here, but from a vendor side, right, from a solutions side, staying in your lane is critical, but also being able to bring in tech stack, right? So if you look at regulation like the FTC safeguards rule, or you look at a cyber insurance application, there's really primarily 6 to 8 critical controls that a business needs to put in place, right? So if you can partner, if the MSP can partner with a cyber insurance provider that has also validated technologies like ours and said that, hey, we've evaluated this, we know it delivers this level of risk reduction, et cetera. And if you've got these tools in place, then we can guarantee that we can reduce your premium, right? And the likelihood that it's going to cover or transfer that risk when that incident happens. Now, to Dan and Chris's point, when an incident happens, yes, there is a transference of incident response or disaster recovery, legal counsel that all needs to take place. However, the MSP, along with whoever's accountable on the internal side of IT, also still has to get you back up and running. And those all need to work together to help achieve that, right? So,
and it's always going to happen at the worst time.
And
absolutely.
That's kind of where we come to odds, though, sometimes, right? I know when cyber insurance sort of first sprung onto the market, I met with a broker and a specialist in that, and he sort of educated me on what from their end that they're expecting the MSP to do when an incident occurs. And then I took that and at our next staff meeting, I said, okay, cybersecurity incident, I just laid one out, like, here's what happens, client's in trouble, right? Cybersecurity, what are you going to do? Well, my tech staff wanted just to jump in and fix it. They're like, we got to fix it. We got to fix it. I got to fix this. I got to get the business back up and running. Great instincts. That's the way, that's the way we were brought up. We want to make things better. But I said, no, now that cyber insurance is here, the only thing we're allowed to do is containment, and we got to get the cyber insurance company involved immediately. Is that right, Andy?
Yes, ma'am. And I apologize for, I believe the issue on my side, local internet connection in my office building here. So I think I should be good from here on out. You're just going to have to look at me from a different angle on my phone. Yeah, it's a big part of what we advise our insureds to do, which is, again, it goes back to our original conversation around, is the insurance agent having a conversation with them, right? Local business gets a cyber insurance policy. 9 times out of 10, they write it. Agent says, hey, thanks for the premium. They stick it in a file somewhere, and that's it, right? Like, we're done at that point.
We're done.
What we suggest is, first of all, that insurance policy needs to come off of the server. A copy needs to go to your MSP. It needs to be attached to your IR plan. Oh, by the way, you need an IR plan, business.
Yeah.
And then at that point, the client, along with the MSP, can contact the claims line proactively, right, for said carrier. Guys, there are over 50 carriers of cyber. There's no way an MSP can keep up with standard operating procedure for one, may be completely and totally different for another, right?
And every incident response process is different for the carrier.
By case scenario, right? You got your policy, send it over to your MSP, take some time, call the hotline. What do you expect of me? What do you expect of my service provider in the event that we do have a claim or we have a ransomware event, right? Like, have those conversations, get those questions asked directly to the carrier up front. That's you're fully able to do that.
That was a super important point.
Andy,
there are different response plans for different insurance carriers. I'm gonna use that later this week, because I've got my mastermind groups coming in for an in-person. One of the things that we're doing is going through incident response plans. Keith, you had something you wanted to add to that?
I was just going to comment that Andy's inferring that you're actually establishing a relationship between the different parties, which means that you have to have communication and sometimes ask the hard questions. You know, so it's never the fun stuff or the things that are, and I think this is where both the MSP, which really is a business, right, and the client of the MSP, which is its own business, we're always so busy working in our businesses that to step outside of that and to work on the business. And one of the challenges we face is trying to help people make improvements or be proactive about changing their access controls to modern solutions. Is most people are just focused on their core competency of making sure their business is producing revenue to stay in business. Totally understand that. The problem is if you never remove yourself from that to actually think proactively, unfortunately, the statistics are that greater than 60% of most businesses that experience a cyber incident today will be out of business in 6 months. And that's that's very sad. And it's not difficult to do, right? You just have to make it a priority to like, you know, it's kind of like being healthy. You got to be proactive. You got to put in the work at the gym and you got to eat the right food, but you got to do it. If you don't, you're going to get the bad results.
Yeah.
I just wanted to chime in on that a little bit. One thing that I'm seeing, though, I do think business owners are starting to understand. One of the things that I do whenever I speak, I always ask the room, who here knows somebody that's had a cyber incident in the last year? And every hand in the room goes down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
You're right.
I
You're
agree
100%
that
right.
it is changing.
Yep. I had, you know, back when we first introduced MFA to my clients, probably 6 years ago, I had one client who just dug his heels in. He was like, he's like, we're not going to do it. And for the first time in the existence of my MSP, I had to create a denial of service letter because I felt that strongly about it. And he, rather than sign the letter, he just begrudgingly decided to get with the program, right? I presented it with him and he went, oh, okay, fine, we'll do it. And that was a great result, because about 6 months later, I got an email from him and he said, I want to thank you. I was wrong. You were right. I was just out golfing with my buddies and every single one of them has had a ransomware incident and we haven't. And he attributed that to MFA, so we took the win on that one.
And something to note with MFA, if there's
there's
I was just
MFA is a requirement for most of them now.
It is, yeah. I'm glad they put Peter's comment on the screen because I was going to bring it up. Dan, this speaks to me and you specifically. A lot of MSPs have not graduated from break fix. We just talked about, you know, and we talked about the difference between how the consumer understands the difference between firms. It is still, even as your firm matures, it's hard to say no to a client.
Yeah, it is. But yeah, the break fix days, I mean, just that business model doesn't work in today's era with the cyber threats.
You'd be surprised how many of them there still are. I'm shocked at that number still.
I don't know. I mean, let's give it some more time, but I don't know how they're going to stay in business that way.
Well, I think a certain measure of MSPs are starting to realize that when there is an incident, and Amy just said this, if you don't create a letter that says you denied doing these things, you actually become liable if you are the one in charge of managing their assets and knowing what their assets are, especially if you've had any part of helping them or even actually signing the cyber insurance application or attesting to that they're meeting something like the FTC safeguards rule. You are going to be the one that gets subrogated against. So if you don't tell them no, or that you're not willing to serve them without the right controls in place, you're actually absorbing that risk.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You're spot on.
Yeah. So There's a lot of firms out there that are billing as an MSP, but in my estimation are not actually providing the services that we as MSPs are supposed to be providing. Dan, what piece of advice would you give those traditional MSPs that aren't addressing this stuff yet when they get confronted with a client that decides to buy cyber insurance?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing: if you partner, or you want to try to get ahead of that conversation if you can, and you want to basically know who the good cyber agents are, what are the good options there, and be the one that brings that to your customer rather than them bringing you something, because a lot of times they're going to try to bring you the cheapest thing, and so you just got to watch out for that. And I think that it's going to be smart for those MSPs that haven't gotten there yet to really learn the insurance landscape. Get with somebody like Rand or Andy here, and understand what that looks like, because you want somebody that's going to help you with the incident response. You want somebody that's going to be able to deliver on the things that they actually need. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of education that they need to step up and get.
Well, and there's two issues, right? There's the client liability, like the end user's liability, and their loss potential, and most of them have no idea, right? So let's take we just had an entity submitted today that they run about 12 million in revenue, and they have $50,000 of cyber insurance. Okay, they were asking their MSP, should we buy more? Should we consider 500,000, right? And it's the clients in the medical field. So our suggestion, their revenue with the PHI that they handle is actually closer to 2 million, right? So there's that gap of insurability, gap of loss potential between the understanding of the client and their average loss potential that we see from claims, right? Now, take that gap and apply that, like Heath said, to the liability of the MSP, right? And this is the issue that I feel like a lot of MSPs still don't have their head around, right? If I tell an MSP, do you realize that your client's insurability or lack thereof directly affects your errors in omission policy? I still get some 10,000 foot stare, and walking procedurally through, okay, what's that client's average loss? How much are they insured for? Will they be indemnified? Do we have contracts in place? What does the MSA say? And then do you have actual E&O insurance that is fit to your fee? There's a lot of things that can go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, Amy, you probably know a lot of MSPs don't even have E&O insurance, and they don't have cyber. I would probably say look in the mirror and see if you've got those things, and if you don't, start there. That's going to teach you a lot. And then
those would be good questions too for businesses to ask of a potential MSP when they're interviewing them. I mean, that's sort of to me, that's like the baseline barrier to entry, right?
We've had a couple statements come in from the crowd, and so there's one up on the screen right now. Is there a standard letter of declining services? I don't know if there's standards. Every business is unique. I do recommend that MSPs contact not only a cyber insurance company that works with MSPs, but also legal counsel. Guys like Brad Gross, who work specifically in the MSP space, that can help you craft the right MSA, right? Like your service agreement needs to have that in there and that language. And that's part of finding the right partners inside of that. And then if you do need to try to get some letter of transference of risk that says, you turn down these services, but you want to still keep maintaining some measure of serving this client on certain tier plans or whatever it is, which is something that does drive me nuts. Like I can understand having different tier plans for different customers, but like major service providers that charge tax for security, like the SSO tax, security should be included in every tier plan. And that needs to be part of your MSA. And you can go above and beyond for other things, but you had better have the foundational controls in place in your base tier plan. And you should probably seek legal counsel about what that looks like, or you are, as Andy just mentioned, assuming a lot of that risk.
Yeah, we're starting
Yeah.
to see a turnaround in that in MSPs where their base plan is only security, right? So it's adding security to whatever else the firm has before they started doing business with them. And then the plan above that includes email and all the other stuff. So just flipping that script, right? It used to be they add on to the basics. Now it is the basic. Oh yeah, and if you want email, we can add that in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
that's
smart.
what that's the way it has to
Well,
be
and,
approached. And
and to Norm's last question or most recent question, that's where you as the business have to decide if you're willing to keep that customer. And I think, as Amy mentioned earlier, when that customer wouldn't sign it, they eventually just accepted turning on MFA. Right? That's just one control of at least 6 that you've got to get in place. But yeah, learn to walk away from that client. No amount of revenue will be worth your reputation. So, what Peter answered it great there. So I think you have to be willing to turn down business, which shows your accountability. And then they should actually then trust, if you're the trusted advisor, right? If they're hiring you to do these things, then they either can trust you and say, this is a must have, right? These are no longer nice to haves. MFA isn't nice to have anymore. It's a requirement. You've got to have it.
Yeah. And another thing I wanted to point out, you mentioned having good counsel when it comes to your MSA. There's actually only a few lawyers that are really experienced with breaches. You need to get that lawyer to come in and help, not your lawyer that wrote your contract, if that's what they specialize in.
Yep. Well, since we talked so much about MFA, Heath, let's wrap up the conversation today. I did mention that I talked to my clients about MFA, and I remember saying to them, and this is like 6 years ago now. I just met with all of them, and I said, look, no one loves MFA any more than they love their password. But it's what we have to do, and it's the way things are today. But the good news is this is the first step toward the path to getting rid of passwords. And they all went, oh, great. That's what a wonderful. And that's how I hooked them. But I was way wrong about the speed of the approaching utopia. So,
Yes.
so where are we at? Where are we now? What's the difference between traditional MFA and password resistant MFA? And when are we going to get rid of passwords?
Well, so there are companies out there that have moved to not having passwords in the majority of their locations. I can honestly attest that inside of our own business, I can't say that I've completely eliminated passwords, but I'm down to less than 5% of the things that I have to access use a password today. So there are modern ways. Traitware is one of them. I'm wearing a shirt that literally says passwords suck, because they do. Right? It's why we founded this company. Yes, I 100% support the agenda that it has taken way too long to get here. However, there is a lot of momentum and there is a difference between consumer accounts and business grade accounts still today, and there always will be, and the requirements around that. I think a lot of consumers are now being exposed to things like pass keys, which I think will address moving to something that is much better or stronger than a password. And a simple way to think about that is, your password's supposed to be a secret, right? No one should know it. The problem is as humans, we like to be efficient, for lack of a better term, lazy. And a lot of the times we use the same or very similar password or passphrase across lots of accounts. Let's say that account doesn't have the best security, that password gets compromised, and then the threat actors can just refill it in everywhere else. And that's the major problem with passwords today, which is why MFA is so important. So moving off of those things for consumers to things like pass keys are also helping bring education around the ability to move to passwordless access for businesses. And still today, we get the statement or question that, well, how do I log in if there's no password, and how do you really know that it's me? Well, modern technology can do that today with lots of different ways. We won't go into the weeds of that. If you're curious about it, reach out. We can definitely have that conversation with you. But it's achievable today. And there is momentum building around getting there. And I think a simple way to think about it is, instead of like, to move to phishing resistance, the secrets that we're using to log in need to be invisible or transparent to the user, meaning it needs to be unknown. If we have to know it or enter it at any given point, we can be tricked into sharing it, unfortunately, or we could share it on purpose. An easy way to think about that is, when Netflix first started, they wanted everyone to share their login to reach critical adoption. Since then, in the last few years, because the value of a Netflix account, it's now a felony to share your password. And a lot of people don't know that. And so, that's a consumer grade product, but they don't want you sharing anymore. Well, if you have the ability to share it, you will, either on purpose or accidentally. So we got to move to, unshareable secrets, which then delivers phishing resistant MFA.
Yeah, I've been on that journey for a long time. Still not there, but it's getting closer and closer. And I can attest that it's worth the effort to get moving toward a passwordless, MFA scenario. It actually makes logging in and using your computer and the internet much more pleasant.
It
Because
does.
things tend to flow a lot better. I remember when I first started using a password management tool, and I thought, I do really need this because I'm sure I have over 100 passwords. Well, by the time I stopped using my password management tool because I was getting close to not needing it anymore, I had over 600 passwords.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't realize that, but just everything and everywhere you go requires a password, and now everything and everywhere you go requires MFA. So we need your passwordless solutions more now than ever.
Yeah.
Well, guys, we have overrun our time as usual. So thank you for today. Thank you for your wonderful comments. Thanks for the great discussion. Thanks for the audience, for you guys for putting in the questions and comments. I hope we sort of got to them all during the conversation, even if we didn't address you specifically. And as a reminder, this show is recorded and it's going to be available on YouTube and LinkedIn. So feel free to share it with your networks, get the word out. And remember, if you have any additional questions or comments, go ahead and put them in, and we will address those later on directly for you. Have a great morning, afternoon, evening, and we'll see you at the next Ready, Set, Cyber.
Thank you very much, Amy.
Thank you.
Thank you.